So I thought what I'd do here is I'd talk about three things. I'd introduce the concept of human security. I guess that many of you are familiar with it because it's a very Canadian concept and it's been developed as part of Canadian foreign policy also. Then I thought I'd talk a little bit about what's happening with civilians and civilian casualties in Afghanistan, and some of the recent problems, some of the very recent problems that have come up that are very worrying, and the trends. So in terms of human security, just conceptually to give you a quick overview, the main difference in human security is between a sort of narrower definition, the idea of freedom from fear, is different to a broader expanded view, freedom from want. And both of these come from the United Nations Development Report of 1994. First of all, freedom from fear is the narrower of the two definitions. It seeks to limit human security to protecting individuals from violent conflicts, while at the same time seeing these threats as strongly associated with poverty, lack of state capacity, and other forms of inequities. Now that's probably in Afghanistan's case at the moment the most important form of human security, or lack of human security. Most of the Afghan people do not have freedom from fear. Most of them are living in a fear-induced situation day by day. The other definition is freedom from want, which argues that threats to human security should be expanded to include hunger, disease, and natural disasters, etc., because they are inseparable concepts in addressing the roots of insecurity, and also because these things typically kill far more people than war, genocide, and terrorism combined. So that develops a focus beyond kind of the immediate political, social violence, with emphasis on human development as the optimum way to protect individual security. Now, I see human security, of course, as encompassing both of these views. I don't think that you can maybe make such a sharp distinction between the two versions. The second term is more broadly related to development, an umbrella term that takes in all sorts of issues, and those issues can include terrorism, refugees, democracy, peacekeeping, development, and many other types of security agendas. But the most important thing to understand about human security is that it involves the individual. It's different from the notion of state security, where you're trying to protect your own borders, your own territory, and which is what we know in political science as the realist kind of approach to international relations. So it refers to the fact that at the end of the day, individual human beings are entitled to security within the states they live in, and therefore challenges the realist paradigm of national security. While states have always defined their security in that way, that is, that state interests are paramount rather than the interests of their citizens. Human security argues that it's individuals who need to be protected, especially when they are usually on the receiving end of state violence. And another doctrine specifically developed by Canada, the responsibility to protect, for instance, which you're now seeing cited in trying to protect Libyan civilians. I would argue that by protecting human security, you are protecting state security, and good governance means protecting human security, making people feel safe and allowing them to pursue their aspirations. Now, unfortunately, in the case of Afghanistan, they have miles to go in terms of these. Of course, national security hasn't even been achieved. The security outside of Kabul hasn't been achieved very well. I mean, there are still bombings within Kabul, of course, but it seems as if there's not that much control by the state of what's happening outside Kabul. So Afghanistan has got a long way to go. And I think particular in three things they lack, they have problems. Last year, 2010, was the worst year for civilian deaths in Afghanistan since 9/11. Insurgents killed more Afghan civilians last year than ever before through three mechanisms: through roadside bombs, through suicide attacks, and through assassinations were responsible for the majority of the conflict-related deaths. These are the figures from the United Nations. Although, again, very difficult to find completely accurate figures. the UN is trying to keep up with these kinds of statistics. Yet deaths attributed to the US-led coalition and to the Afghan security forces dropped sharply by more than a quarter, despite the surge in troops and an increased campaign against the Taliban. Now, one of the problems, of course, and I think the panel has alluded to this so far, is that there's a wide distrust in Afghanistan. Afghanistan has been invaded over and over again through the centuries, and there's a distrust of foreign occupation forces. There's also immense distrust of the Karzai government, because the Karzai government is seen as broadly corrupt. The elections were not really very good in terms of their democracy. The polls were distorted, etc. The elections in Afghanistan have a long way to go before they can be even equated with any kind of Western democratic values in that sense. So the other thing that's come up, of course, is that body counts of the enemy dead are back in fashion, something that was a notorious and discredited measure of success. And again, we can compare that to Vietnam, has come back. The US military proudly announced last week that it had killed 952 Taliban and captured 2,469 in the 90 days up to the beginning of December last year. One general boasted every 24 hours on average we're killing 3 to 5 mid-level enemy leaders. So again, you have this situation where you see this broad military campaign designed to take out Taliban leaders, designed to take out the Taliban, but that's not increasing the human security of ordinary individuals within Afghanistan. There's no political policy behind that, as I'm sure you would agree. It's a strategy of let's wipe out the terrorists, let's wipe out the Taliban, but what do we do then? What do we have to sort of say in a positive fashion what's going to happen within Afghanistan? And I think that's where the problem really lies. We have no political policy in Afghanistan. We have a policy that's completely lost its way. If we ever did have a policy in Afghanistan, we certainly haven't learned the lessons of the past. Another problem is the persuasive corruption of the Afghan administration, which only seems to get worse as it goes on. Every election appears more corrupt than the previous election in that sense. So there's a massive distrust, not only on the part of ordinary Afghan civilians, on ordinary Afghanis, of the government. There's a massive distrust of the occupation forces. And that doesn't breed anything in good, positive feelings in terms of human security. People feel very insecure. 2 minutes. Afghan civilian casualties, again, just to repeat that, up 15% on last year. You would expect the civilian casualties to be decreasing the longer the war went on, the more that they were in control of the policy, the longer they were staying there, creating an Afghan political and military force. That's not happening. It's up 15% on last year, and over 8,000 civilians have been killed in the past 4 years. Let me just finish with another aspect that has come up very recently and has not received widespread media coverage. It was reported in The Independent in the United Kingdom, which I strongly recommend if you read people like Robert Fisk on Afghanistan, usually very good in terms of the analysis. But a recent problem has come up that the United States government has been forced into an embarrassing apology after photographs emerged of American soldiers posing with the corpses of Afghan civilians in scenes reminiscent to the Abu Ghraib prison scandal during the Iraq war. You may remember Abu Ghraib as a scene of torture and a complete violation of people's human rights within Iraq. Well, that's happened in Afghanistan with about 12 American soldiers. In one picture, these pictures were released by Der Spiegel, the German newspaper, who always seems to have a kind of grasp on these issues. In one picture, a US soldier grins wolfishly for the camera while gripping a corpse's hair, pulling back its head like a hunting trophy in what could become an enduring image of how the West has lost its way in Afghanistan. So this does nothing for human security. This does nothing to give ordinary Afghans the feeling that, you know, someone is supporting them. If the US Army is actually saying, well, look, you know, this is the way we treat ordinary Afghans, or this is a disrespect for human rights that we have in Afghanistan. So, to my mind, what's happened with American policy is they have not learned any lessons from Vietnam. They've not learned any lessons from the previous colonial wars in Afghanistan, and they need to get their Human Security Act together and try and protect the human rights of these civilians.